Hello and welcome back to the Training Tom podcast, the place where I share the lessons I have learned, the challenges I'm currently facing, and the questions I have for my future self. And today's episode is lessons we can learn from mortality. So let's get into it. Now, before I get into today's episode too much, I just want to share that I don't want this to be a doom and gloom podcast episode. I want this to be an episode that actually reminds us of how lucky we are to be alive at the moment and how we can try to make the most of the life that we have at this moment in time. I don't want it to scare people or, just remind us of death. I want it to be uplifting. So that's the kind of premise of the episode. I want it to be positive. But that being said, we can't talk about mortality without some kind of negative connotations around it. So hopefully the way that I present this will be in a positive way, and hopefully you'll take it that way as well. But I appreciate everybody has got their own perspectives on this. And it might be perhaps a challenging episode for all of us to listen to and to come to terms with as well. Now, this episode the thought of this episode came from one of the pages in the Daily Stoic. And I don't know if I've shared this before. I think I might have done. But I tend to try and read the Daily Stoic every single day in the morning once I get up. And from that day's excerpt or that, bit of stoicism that is shared, I tend to then write some notes in my journal to try and, process the information that has been shared in that day's teachings, shall we say. So I actually want to start off this episode by reading the day's teachings that I think this episode came from. And I've made a note of it on my phone. So this is where this episode was really, really born from. And the thoughts around this episode have come from. So I'm just going to read this page or this day's Stoic reading. For anybody that has got the Daily Stoic, it is from February 25th or page 65 in my book. And the lesson is the smoke and dust of myth. Keep a list before your mind of those who burned with anger and resentment about something, of even the most renowned for success, misfortune, evil deeds, or any special distinction. Then ask yourself, how did that work out? Smoke and dust, the stuff of simple myth trying to be legend. And that's a quote from Marcus Aurelius and his Meditations. And the writers of the Daily Stoic, Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman, go on to explain what they think this means. And they go on to say, in Marcus Aurelius' writings, he constantly points out how the emperors who came before him were barely remembered just a few years later. To him, this was a reminder that no matter how much he conquered, no matter how much he inflicted his will on the world, it would be like building a castle in the sand, soon to be erased by the winds of time. The same goes for those driven to the heights of hate or anger or obsession or perfectionism. Marcus liked to point out that Alexander the Great, one of the most passionate and ambitious men who ever lived, was buried in the same ground as his mule driver. Eventually, all of us will pass away and slowly be forgotten. We should enjoy this brief time we have on earth, not be enslaved to emotions that make us miserable and dissatisfied. And when I read that, I remember thinking that it really highlights how we can think we are, or sometimes at least I know that I can think that I'm God's gift to the world, that everybody will remember me and the spotlight is always on me. And I know that I've spoken about the spotlight effect before. and how what I do, everybody is looking at me. Everybody is conscious of the way that I act, of the way that I am trying to present myself, and also cares about what I do. And reading through that day's Stoic teachings, it reminded me that once I do leave this earth, the chances are I won't necessarily be remembered for a very long time. And this goes throughout history as well. I've kind of thought a lot about this over the past couple of weeks, and in particular, when planning this episode, I thought a lot about this and thought about how many kings and queens I could name. I could probably go back maybe 3 generations of kings and queens, and then there are obviously standout kings and queens that we might remember, but even then, I wouldn't be able to list the entire British monarchy across the course of history. And if I can't list the entire British monarchy across the course of history, then what's the chances that in 200, 300, 500 years' time, somebody would be able to look back at who Thomas Regan was and the accomplishments that he had during his time? And for me, that was a very sobering thought. It was a thought that reminded me, in the course of human history, I am just one person. And yes, I might think that the whole world is looking at me. But in reality, I'm the only one that thinks that way. And perhaps other people think the same way as well. But it also reminded me of the concept of death and of mortality. And when I think back throughout my life, and especially into my childhood, I really used to fear death. I didn't want to die. I wanted to try and live forever. And just tried to essentially escape death. However, recently that has started to change. My perception on that has started to change, not just from the Stoic teachings, but also from listening to different podcasters and the people that they've interviewed and the lessons that they have been sharing on those episodes. And it's really interesting how I used to have this fear of death, but now I think of it in a completely different way, in that I try to understand that it's inevitable. There are 2 things, or there's a famous quote that there are 2 things that are inevitable in life: death and taxes. And living in fear of death is not going to help me live a fulfilling life and not help me stay in the present moment as well. Now, I guess there are multiple perspectives on this. If you have a fear of death, then you might live a more free life. You might perhaps take more risks and, challenge yourself a lot more. But I found that fear of death actually hindered me and meant that I didn't take as many risks because I wanted to live for as long as possible. But like I say, recently that has changed. Recently, I know that death is inevitable. So actually, I'm trying to make the most of the time that I have, trying to make sure that I live every moment to the fullest. And of course, there are times where that's not going to be the case, where you have to do the mundane and normal day-to-day things that you need to do. But in the time that I do have that is free, that is up for me to decide how I spend that time or how I utilize that time, I'm trying to make sure now that I utilize it not in a fearful way, that I utilize it in an excited way, in a way that means that I take risks, that I challenge myself, that I embrace uncomfortable situations, because it's where I feel the most alive. And like I've alluded to in previous episodes, in the past, I feel like I've very much been going through the motions. I've been living, but I haven't felt like I've been alive. Or should I say that I've been alive, but I haven't truly been living. And now I'm trying to make a very conscious effort to live, to go out into the world, to experience new things, to try and, just live as fulfilling life as I possibly can with the resources that I have and the time that I have as well. And there's another thing that comes to mind when I think about mortality and when I think about trying to live as fulfilling life as possible. And it comes down to the risks that I don't want to say the risks that I've taken, but the choices that I've made recently. Starting this podcast could be classed as one of those things, in that in the past, I would have been very fearful of what people thought of me by releasing these episodes, by sharing my thoughts online, essentially for the entire world to hear. But when you break it down and you realize that fundamentally, most of the people that you might interact with are so focused on what they're doing, they're not worried about what you're doing. And yeah, they might listen to an episode, but after they've listened to that episode, maybe they'd go about the rest of their day, and a few days later, they've simply forgotten about what you spoke about. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe some people do take great, I don't know, you don't want to use the term wisdom, but maybe it does. Maybe listening to some of the things that I have to say does encourage people, or does, as grandiose as this might sound, inspire people, or maybe it just gets them to think slightly differently for a couple of hours or for a week or however long it might be. But ultimately, when it boils down, nobody is going to really... This might sound really bad, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but nobody cares. I can release all of this content and it doesn't really matter right now. And I'm really grateful for all of the people that are listening. And I've received a couple of messages recently from people, just them sharing how useful it's been to listen to the content that I'm sharing. And I do really appreciate that. And I do hope that it does inspire people and does help people feel less alone, which was actually one of the messages that I received. But in the grand scheme of the world, the grand scheme of the universe, should I say, I'm simply like a grain of sand on a beach. And how much of an impact I can have on the entire world at this moment in time, it's probably very slim. But maybe the impact that I can have in the small community that I'm creating or in my immediate circle could perhaps be a little bit bigger. There's that analogy of a pebble dropping in the ocean, and the ripple effect that radiates out from that can sometimes go on for miles. And maybe that is something that I'm doing right now. Maybe it's something that will happen in the future. But ultimately, at this moment in time, I'm trying not to fear what other people think, trying not to fear death, and therefore trying to take more risks because I want to make the most of the time that I do have and the life that I'm living at the moment. And I'm also somebody that, when I listen to music, really listens to the lyrics that are being sung and trying to feel the music as well. And there's another quote that I want to share with you. And it's from a song called Glorious by Macklemore and Skylar Grey. And it's a wonderful song, and I really love listening to it. But there's a line in there that says, and I haven't made a note of it, so I want to make sure that I get it right. And the line is, they say you die twice. First when they bury you in the grave, and the second time is the last time that somebody mentions your name. They say you die twice. The first time when they bury you in the grave, and the second time is the last time that somebody mentions your name. And this links in with another quote that I heard from a podcaster. And another way to think of this is I'm actually going to ask you a question. And that question is, can you remember who your grandparents' grandparents are? And I feel like it links in really nicely with that quote, or with that lyric from the song Glorious. Because, like I've said, we often think that the spotlight is on us. But in 100, 200 years' time, perhaps we won't be remembered. No matter what impact we've made on this world, perhaps we won't be remembered. And again, that can be a really scary thought, thinking nobody's going to care what I do. But depending on your perspective, it can also be a really uplifting thought. Because if nobody is going to care what you're going to do in 200 years' time, then why not do the things that you've been putting off? Why not do the things that scare you? Why not do the things that you've always wanted to do, but never actually done? Give them a go. See what happens. Because you never know what the outcome of that could be. And maybe in 200 years' time, you doing that thing actually means that you are remembered. Maybe it changes your family's course of history. Again, maybe that's quite a grandiose thing to think of. But also maybe it doesn't. And that's also okay. But at least you tried. And at least you perhaps lived the most fulfilling life that you could live, and you made the most of the time that you had on this earth. And I think that is the thing that I'm trying to get at. It's not that I'm trying to make it all doom and gloom and make us think, oh, well, nobody's going to care, so what's the point? I'm actually trying to get us to think that how liberating is that? How liberating is it knowing that actually you can live the life the way that you want to. You can try those things. You can take a few risks, and maybe nobody's going to care. Maybe it doesn't matter what people think of you, because you can just do those things, try them, and if they work, fantastic, because you wanted to do them anyway. So you've tried and it worked out. And if it doesn't work out, at least you can get through the rest of your life knowing that you tried. And hopefully nothing bad happens as a result of trying as well. I think I've said it in a previous episode where a lot of the time I've been fearful of the what ifs. Oh, what if I try this and this happens? And a lot of the time, the what ifs that I imagine are nowhere near as bad as what actually happens. So I'm trying to pitch these lessons on mortality in the most positive way possible. That it's so liberating knowing that you can live the life that you want, or not live the life that you want to live perhaps, but live perhaps a more free life and a more present life, knowing that actually, yeah, one day you are going to die, and the chances are one day your name will be forgotten. But that for me is a very liberating thing. I understand that there's another side of that, and I've said it already, that might be quite scary as well. And I 100% appreciate that, because I've certainly been there myself. But the way that I'm trying to see it, and the way that my mindset is trying to pitch it, is that's a liberating thing. Another thing that I want to reference is a video clip from Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he looks at the cosmic calendar of all of time. So from whatever your beliefs might be, he pictures it from the Big Bang all the way through to the present day. And he puts every moment in history on a calendar. And it starts with the Big Bang, like I said, which is January the 1st. And it goes all the way through to the 31st of December, New Year's Eve. And if you were to place the human race, so the entire human race, on that timeline, the entire human race has only been around since late on New Year's Eve. Now, he doesn't give a specific time, but late on New Year's Eve could literally be 30 minutes in a year. The year of cosmic time. The human race has been on this planet, or has been in the universe, for maybe as little as 30 minutes on that calendar. And if we think about our years, yes, our years can fly by, but the entirety of the universe, from the moment it was started or formed to now, humans have made up such a small part of that history of the universe. We have played such a small part so far as a human race. So if I'm lucky, 80 years on this earth, again, are going to play an even smaller part. And I've referenced it already, that small grain of sand on an endless beach. And again, the reason I'm saying it is I'm trying to view that as a liberating thing rather as an inhibiting thing. I've mentioned already that spotlight effect that we have. You know, we always think the spotlight is on us. Everybody around us is looking at what we do and how that impacts them, how that impacts the world, how perhaps that impacts their immediate community, whatever. But if everybody thinks the spotlight is on them, then nobody is looking at what everybody else is doing. So again, that can be a very liberating thing because we all think the spotlight is on us. So we're not looking at everybody else. We're only looking at what we are doing and the impact that that has on the people around us. There's this idea of being the main character in your own film, and I 100% agree with that. I think we should all be the main characters in the movie of our life. And I'll admit as well, I think throughout most of my life, I'd say throughout most of my life that I don't feel like I have been the main character. So now I'm trying to be the main character. But that doesn't mean that I should think the spotlight is always on me. Another way that I'm trying to view that is that if I'm writing a book about my life, or somebody else is writing a book about my life, how do I want that book to be written? Do I want it to be every chapter repeating the same story over and over again? Or do I want each chapter to be slightly different, to share a different experience, to show that I'm trying to live as presently and, as I've mentioned already, as fulfilling life as possible? And I'm sharing all of this, like I mentioned earlier, not to be doom and gloom. I'm sharing this because it's helping me realize that I shouldn't let fear and emotion hold me back. If I make mistakes, if I have failures throughout my life, which, as all of us have, I've had plenty of those already, the chances are no one will remember them. Maybe I remember them, but realistically speaking, nobody's going to remember them. The things that I think are big and important at this moment in time are often tiny and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And that was no more relevant than an experience that I had recently. And yeah, I'm not necessarily prepared to share that experience right now, but it's a sobering thought for me and actually very apt for the experience that I had, because I did think it was incredibly important and a very big moment. But realistically, and from the few people that I've spoken to about it, it is a tiny and insignificant moment. So I'm not going to stress about it. And those mistakes that we make, those failures that we have, again, are things that we can learn from and things that can help us to grow to be a different person. But importantly, I want the main message from this episode to be that we should try and be as present as possible in the things that we do. Again, as somebody who has worried about the future, being depressed about the past, trying to stay present in this moment can sometimes seem really hard because there are so many things in the future that we want to try and achieve. There are so many things that we've done in the past that we might stress about. But ultimately, we can't control the future, and the past has already happened. So the only thing that we can focus on is being present in this moment. Because this moment is fleeting. It won't last forever. We only have a finite amount of time on this earth. So we need to try and stay as present as possible. Try to listen when loved ones are talking to us. And I know that I'm guilty of this, and my sister will absolutely attest to that sometimes I can be distracted and not listen to the people that are important in my life. So truly trying to listen to what people are saying. When we meet up as friends, trying to be as present as possible in that moment. Not sitting there on my phone looking at what the rest of the world is doing, but truly embracing that moment with people that I care about. And those are things that I'm trying to make an active effort to do at this moment in time so that I can carry that through the rest of my life as well. Because ultimately, we never know when it'll be the last chance we get in that moment. We never know when we're going to take our last breath. We never know when we're going to see that person for the last time. We never know when we're going to hug our family members for the last time as well. And again, it's very difficult in the moment to do this, but trying to treasure every single moment that we have. Because we just don't know when that last time is going to be. And again, it just reminds me of that wonderful quote from Kung Fu Panda. And it's escaped my mind. And it's one of my favourite quotes from any film ever. Let's try and remember it. Tomorrow is a mystery. There's definitely tomorrow's a mystery in it. But today is a gift. That's why it's called the present. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. But today is a gift. That's why they call it the present. And that's what I want this final part of this episode to focus on. Regardless of your religious beliefs, we only get one chance to live this life at this moment in time. We can fear death. We can be scared of what comes after death. And again, your religious beliefs might indicate that there is something after death. The way that my mind works is that at this moment in time, there's no proof of that. So I have to be as present in this moment as possible. The present moment is all we really have. So trying to stay present in everything that I do, trying to listen in every interaction that I have, but truly listen, not just hear what somebody is saying, but actually listen to what they're saying. Trying to enjoy every moment that I have with loved ones. And that, in all honesty, has been really difficult recently. I know that I haven't been doing that. but it's something that I'm learning at this moment in time. You could perhaps say that it's a challenge that I'm currently facing. But one challenge that I'm absolutely trying to embrace and trying to really ingrain into my mind for the present moment, but also for the future version of myself, is that I want to try and be as present as possible. Because like I said, we never know when we're going to take that last breath. That has been lessons on mortality. Hopefully you have found it to be an uplifting episode. Like I said at the start, it could be seen in a very negative way and quite a daunting way as well. But I do hope it's perhaps just reminded all of us that this life is finite and we need to make the most of the moments that we do have. So I hope it has been uplifting. Thank you as always for listening if you have been. And as always, my name is Tom Regan and this is the Training Tom podcast.